President Trump says the U.S. is terminating its relationship with the World Health Organization. Natalie Brand has the latest.
President Trump announced the U.S. is pulling out of the World Health Organization.
We will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs.
The change comes as the U.S. death toll from the coronavirus surpassed 100,000 this week. He blames the organization for its response to the pandemic and accuses them of favoring China.
China has total control over the World Health Organization, despite only paying $40 million per year compared to what the United States has been paying, which is approximately $450 million a year.
The president says the administration will take steps to sanction China in response to the country's new security law that threatens Hong Kong's long-standing independence.
The United States will also take necessary steps to sanction PRC and Hong Kong officials directly or indirectly involved in eroding Hong Kong's autonomy and just, if you take a look, absolutely smothering Hong Kong's freedom.
The president announced the U.S. will no longer give Hong Kong the favorable trade relationship the island has always enjoyed.
China has replaced its promised formula of one country, two systems with one country, one system. Therefore, I am directing my administration to begin the process of eliminating policy exemptions that give Hong Kong different and special treatment.
The State Department will also be issuing a travel advisory for Americans in Hong Kong, warning that they may be subject to increased danger and surveillance by Chinese authorities. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
For more on this, I want to bring in Jeff Mason. He's a White House correspondent for Reuters. Jeff, nice to see you again. What does President Trump's decision mean for both the World Health Organization and the U.S.?
Well, it's multifaceted, this decision. I would start by saying it's not a big surprise. The president signaled several weeks ago that the U.S. might pull out. He did stop or put it at what he called at the time a temporary hold on U.S. funding for the organization. And now he's saying we're out. In terms of what it means broadly, I mean, it means for the World Health Organization that it's losing a lot of money, and that will be a major hit. Now, China has stepped up in the meantime since the president first threatened to pull funding and say that it would be giving more money to the organization. That will also increase its influence, which is exactly the thing that President Trump has been objecting to and did object to today. So it will mean that the United States won't have a voice in the WHO. It is also a way, obviously, for the president to punish an organization that he thinks has been unfairly preferential to China and less so to the United States.
Well, what exactly did the president want the WHO to do differently in its handling of the coronavirus pandemic, and how is China connected to that?
Well, from the very beginning, the president has said, and he's not the only one who has said this, that the WHO was did not put enough pressure on China to give information to let people from the WHO and from the United States in to analyze and see what was going on in Wuhan. And he also believes, and there's some evidence for this, that the WHO unnecessarily and incorrectly praised China's initial response. So it's those early missteps that he has been critical of. He has called for reform of the organization. Reforms that, in fairness, are not easy to get done in 30 days, and those didn't. And so now the U.S. is pulling out.
Well, President Trump is also criticizing China over a controversial national security law for Hong Kong. Tell us more about how the Trump administration is handling that situation.
Well, it was well set out in the package that you just played. The president announced today that the United States is going to change the special status that has been afforded to Hong Kong for decades. And that will have an impact on the economy there for sure. It will probably have a larger impact on China's economy, but it will also have an impact on the United States because U.S. businesses benefited from that special status. So it's a major blow. But it will have repercussions for companies on both sides.
So on a different topic, Jeff, Twitter fact-checked and censored some of the president's tweets this week, and the White House responded with an executive order restricting legal protections for social media companies. How significant a move is that?
It's significant. The executive order itself is perhaps less significant than the threat that the president and Attorney General Barr issued yesterday, which was to also pursue legislation and legislation that would change the laws right now that sort of give more freedom and significantly less regulation of companies such as Twitter, Facebook, Google, the internet and social media companies that we all know and that we all use. So it is a threat in that way, and we'll have to see how it develops. But I think the social media executive order that you were referring to was sort of the first step in what appears to be a plan for a longer process.
Well, in addition to that executive order, the president has called for completely repealing an existing law that protects social media companies, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. What is that, and how would repealing it benefit President Trump?
Well, it's a law that has been or a section of the law that has been in force for a long time, and the critics say that it is too broad, that it basically gives too much freedom to these companies, and that it doesn't allow for some regulation. The president wants to change that, and he's as I said before, sort of starting that process now with this executive order. But he said yesterday, and I was in the Oval Office for the announcement when he said this, that he and the administration would pursue legislation to either totally do away with Section 230 or introduce regulation there.
All right, Jeff Mason for us. Jeff, always good to have you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Elaine.
We are going to take a quick break. We will be right back with the rest of your day's news. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You're donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
How do we put this in perspective about how worried we should be?
We're going to share the newest numbers and critical information on the outbreak.
Vladimir Duthier is tracking the plight of the restaurant business. Vlad?
You've been talking to doctors. What are they saying to you about their experiences?
Doctors and scientists in a race against time to cure coronavirus. Every evening we'll show how close they are, racing to a cure on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
These are hard, tiring, taxing jobs, even before coronavirus came.
This is my Clorox wipes, my Lysol. I have no idea what I'm walking into. I don't know if the customers are carriers.
I feel privileged to be out here when so many people are out of work.
Did you ever think that you would find yourselves at the front line?
We have the opportunity to bring something valuable to the community, and that feels good.
We have to be willing to change policy on a permanent basis to recognize and honor these workers.
It doesn't seem like it's worth the risk that you endure every day.
I have to do what I can to take care of myself and my family.
If you had the choice, would you stay home?
Maybe, yeah.
The truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The concentration of the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
SpaceX and NASA are getting ready for a second attempt at history on Saturday. They're planning to send astronauts to the International Space Station after Wednesday's mission was scrubbed. Skylar Henry reports from the Kennedy Space Center, where weather could once again postpone the launch.
It's on to round 2 for SpaceX and NASA as crews prepare Launch Pad 39A for another chance at a historic mission after storm threats scrubbed the first attempt.
I think this is certain, though. We are going to launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil.
Astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken are readying themselves for the launch that'll get them to the International Space Station. After spending time with family, the two are getting briefed ahead of Saturday's mission.
There were learning opportunities there. We're always gathering data. But I will tell you, the rocket was ready to go. The crew capsule was ready to go. All the ground systems were working.
Weather is still going to be a factor for Saturday's launch. NASA's rescue team says it not only has to be clear here in Florida, but off the coast and into the Atlantic Ocean.
If you splash down and end up in the water on anywhere along the coast, you can't have such bad weather that affects a rescue, affects survivability concerns.
The launch will help set a new standard for American space travel, breaking NASA's dependence on Russian spacecraft and creating a new opportunity for private companies like SpaceX.
What Elon Musk has done for the American space program is he has brought vision and inspiration that we hadn't had, for 10 years, since the retirement of the space shuttles, 9 years.
NASA is clear, though. While everyone is ready to launch, safety comes first. Skylar Henry, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center.
And CBSN will have live coverage of the SpaceX launch tomorrow. And for more info, you can visit our website, cbsnews.com/launch. The Scripps National Spelling Bee has been canceled for the first time since World War II. Janet Shamlian shows us how 2 former top spellers helped form their own competition online.
CLC. Some kids, it seems, live to spell. CHINKEN. The best place to show off that talent has been the annual Scripps Spelling Bee, which this year has been canceled.
This one's from 2010.
The news hit hard for brother and sister Shoba and Shurav Desari.
You were in the Scripps Bee 3 times?
I was, yes.
And a semifinalist?
Yeah.
Between the 2 of them, they've reached the finals 5 times. The Houston area teens knew it would be disappointing
so that word can go
for this year's finalists.
If you get all 3 parts right,
so they're hosting their own National Spelling Bee online.
grammar file. That is correct. Our main motivation for doing it is just to give these 8th graders the chance that they wouldn't have had to compete at Scripps or, just some sort of alternate path.
The Desaris started Spell Pundit, a spelling bee preparation company where the virtual competition was announced for children up to 8th grade.
Especially for 8th graders, this would have been their last chance to compete in the National Spelling Bee, so it's just kind of so that their work doesn't go to a complete waste.
It may not be the pomp and circumstance of the National Bee, but 280 students signed up, and the competition is as fierce as ever.
May I have the definition again?
The $2,500 first prize is a drop in the bucket compared to the $50,000 Scripps offers its winner.
ADUST.
Kirthana Krishnan, who went to Scripps last year and qualified again this year, says it's not about the cash.
We have a champion of the 2020.
What do you like about spelling?
It's like a puzzle. You think outside of the box to find the parts of the word and put them together.
What are your feelings going into this virtual spelling bee?
I feel it'll be a new experience, and I feel like it'll go well.
Shoba and Shurav put in safeguards to keep competitors from receiving help, but say they're probably not needed.
Are you expecting that the honor system will prevail here?
Most of these spellers, they understand the bee. They're very competitive about it. I don't think any of them, if they won, I don't think they'd want it to be because they cheated.
All right, your word is Karashti.
And last night, the finals.
Okay, K-H-A-R-O-S-H-T-H-I, Karashti.
That is correct.
The winner was 14-year-old Navneet Murali from Edison, New Jersey.
You're the champion of the 2020 Spell Pundit Online National Spelling Bee.
It may not be Scripps, but it's still victory, spelled with a capital V. Janet Shamlian, CBS News, Spring, Texas.
Congratulations. Here's a look at some of the stories we'll be covering in our next hour. The former Minnesota police officer who knelt on George Floyd's neck has been arrested. We'll have the latest on the protests unfolding in Minneapolis and nationwide. Plus, the U.S. coronavirus death toll tops 101,000. New York City, once the epicenter of the country's outbreak, could start reopening as soon as next week. And Twitter puts a warning label on one of the president's tweets, where Mr. Trump's feud with social media companies stands now. You're streaming CBSN. CBS News, always on.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You were donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks.
It's pretty sad.
How do we put this in perspective about how worried we should be?
We're going to share the newest numbers and critical information on the outbreak.
Vladimir Duthier is tracking the plight of the restaurant business. Vlad?
You've been talking to doctors. What are they saying to you about their experiences?
Doctors and scientists in a race against time to cure coronavirus. Every evening we'll show how close they are, racing to a cure on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
These are hard, tiring, taxing jobs, even before coronavirus came.
This is my Clorox wipes, my Lysol. I have no idea what I'm walking into. I don't know if the customers are carriers.
I feel privileged to be out here when so many people are out of work.
Did you ever think that you would find yourselves at the front line?
We have the opportunity to bring something valuable to the community, and that feels good.
We have to be willing to change policy on a permanent basis to recognize and honor these workers.
Doesn't seem like it's worth the risk that you endure every day.
I have to do what I can to take care of myself and my family.
If you had the choice, would you stay home?
Maybe, yeah.
The truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The concentration of the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Patients built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
How do we put this in perspective about how worried we should be?
We're going to share the newest numbers and critical information on the outbreak.
You've been talking to doctors. What are they saying to you about their experiences?
To be with you. Thanks for joining us. The fired police officer who held his knee on the neck of a black man in Minneapolis has been arrested and charged with murder. George Floyd's death sparked nationwide protests. They escalated in several cities Friday. President Trump addressed the demonstrations and subsequent anger later that evening.
I've asked that the Department of Justice expedite the federal investigation into his death and do it immediately, do it as quickly as absolutely possible. We also have to make the statement, and it's very important, that we have peaceful protesters and support the rights for peaceful protesters. We can't allow a situation like happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos, and we understand that very well. It's very important, I believe, to the family, to everybody, that the memory of George Floyd be a perfect memory. Let it be a perfect memory. The looters should not be allowed to drown out the voices of so many peaceful protesters.
The president added that Floyd's family is entitled to justice and the people of Minnesota are entitled to live in safety. Nicole Killian has more.
Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer seen on video with his knee on George Floyd's neck, was taken into custody Friday.
He has been charged with third-degree murder. This is by far the fastest we've ever charged a police officer.
The arrest comes as Minnesota State Police, backed by the National Guard, took up positions on the streets of Minneapolis following another night of fires and looting. The governor called for order to be restored.
We cannot have the looting and the recklessness that went on.
Last night, protesters set fire to the police station where the 4 officers involved in Floyd's arrest worked before they were fired. Other fires continued to burn in the morning hours. Minneapolis police say Chauvin has had 18 complaints against him in his career, but faced discipline for only 2. Protesters say his arrest is just a start.
Please do not run away with the narrative that highlights one arrest. That is nothing at the end of the day. They should have been arrested, but we want to see 4 arrests and charges for everything that they did that violated the law.
Prosecutors say the investigation into the other officers is ongoing, but they anticipate bringing charges against them. Nicole Killian, CBS News, Washington.
Joel Payne and Joseph Pinion join me now. Joel is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist, and Joseph is a Republican strategist. Welcome to you both. Joseph, I'd like to start with you. President Trump on Friday spoke about the death of George Floyd. He said that he spoke to members of his family, and I'm paraphrasing here, he called them terrific people. He also said, though, with respect to the protesters, he said we have to make a statement that we have peaceful protesters. They support the rights for peaceful protesters. However, he said we can't allow a situation like what happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos. What do you make, Joseph, of how it is that the president has responded to this incident since it happened?
There is the good, which I think is everyone can acknowledge, is that what happened to our dear brother Floyd should not happen to anyone. That if you are a person who is protesting about your right to not wear a mask in public, then you should certainly be in solidarity with those individuals who are protesting for their right not to have their life snuffed out by a knee on their neck. So I think that that is obviously encouraging. That's what we want to see from the leader of the free world. The tweets, on the other hand, are probably leaving much to be desired. And I think what we lose sight of often is that, I think black people all across America want to see President Trump unhinged and unvarnished as much as he is for the coal miner in West Virginia, as he is for the black person who's losing their life through no fault of their own. And I think until we see that, I think you're still going to have that resentment and that animosity that's been there for a lot of time since day one.
Joel, let's show that tweet again here for people who may not have seen it. This is the president's initial tweet. He said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. But then the president tweeted again later to clarify, apparently, what he meant by that. He said, looting leads to shooting, and that's why a man was shot and killed in Minneapolis on Wednesday night. You heard Joseph say that there's much to be desired in that. How do you read this? And the fact that the president has spoken at the White House about this case, and he said that he's spoken to the family as well.
It's weak. It's not enough. This is a president who never misses an opportunity
when people are protesting across the country around reopening the country to defend them as good people, and yet he calls people who are protesting the death of an innocent man thugs. It's not enough. Donald Trump, we call on him to do more. There are moments that rise above the person who's the president, that rise to the office of the presidency. And we expect our leader at a moment like this to bring us together. We expect our leader at a moment like this to have the words to heal, not to divide. Donald Trump is ill-equipped for this job at this moment in history. And we've seen no better personification of that than what we've seen over the last 24 hours. Using his Twitter feed to inflame people. I was afraid what he was going to say at 2 o'clock today. Part of me is upset that he didn't address this when he talked about pulling out of the WHO at 2 o'clock. But part of me is happy he didn't say anything else to inflame, because I don't trust him. That is an awful position to feel as an African-American man in this country.
So, Joel, former Vice President Joe Biden, as you know, also spoke about George Floyd and the anger that is resonating throughout the country over his death. I want to play some of what he said.
Imagine if every time your husband or son, wife or daughter left the house, you feared for their safety from bad actors and bad police. Imagine if you had to have that talk with your child about not asserting your rights, taking the abuse handed out to them just so they could make it home. Imagine having police called on you just for sitting in Starbucks or renting an Airbnb or watching birds. This is the norm black people in this country deal with. They don't have to imagine it. The anger and frustration and the exhaustion, it's undeniable. But that's not the promise of America. It's long past time that we made the promise of this nation real for all people.
Joel, how does Biden's response differ from the president's?
I mean, Joe Biden sounds like somebody who can look beyond his poll numbers. He sounds like a man who understands that now is a time for healing, for bringing together, for understanding, for in-depth reflection. He spoke with humility. He spoke with understanding of what it's like to be a black man like myself and Joseph. He spoke as if he actually did speak to the family of Mr. Floyd. And Joe Biden, look, his gift here is that he is the ultimate empathetic politician. And he sounded those alarms today. This has nothing to do with who's going to vote for who in November. This is about what we expect out of a leader. And today, Joe Biden passed the commander-in-chief test, and Donald Trump failed it.
Joseph, I'm wondering if more broadly you think that this issue of law enforcement and excessive use of force might surface in the 2020 presidential campaign as it did in 2016. And if it does surface in a larger way, Joseph, what might be different in the conversation, in the debate and discussion surrounding it this time?
Well, look, I think that the unfortunate reality is that I don't think that this is going to be a frontline issue in the way that people like myself and Joel wish it would become an issue. I think that too often that we have occurrences like this and then we move on to what's next, particularly now in these times when we have the corona, all the issues we've dealing with it. So I think those are the things that are really going to be front of mind for voters. But I will say, as I've said from the beginning, we had close to 40,000 people were the difference in a place like Minnesota last time. And I think that when you start talking about where it seems President Trump is headed, where we inevitably end with the law and order versus justice argument, as if somehow we can't have law and order and justice together. I think it's going to be interesting to see as the fires continue to burn in Minnesota, if that has an impact on those swing voters in the state that President Trump lost by less than 2% just 4 years ago.
So Joe Biden says that he'll be announcing his running mate in August. And Joel, how might what is happening in Minneapolis and around the country right now factor into his decision? Is he under greater pressure to choose a woman of color?
Look, I think it was already a very hot a churning issue within the Democratic circles that I operate within about what he was going to do. I've always thought about it as this. Black elites and kind of mainstream Democrats really did feel more strongly about Biden picking an African American to complete that coalition. Rank and file Black Democrats, frankly, like people who I talk to in my family or kind of everyday folks who really aren't kind of grass tops political leaders, they want Joe Biden to win. And if that win forces him to pick Gretchen Whitmer or Amy Klobuchar, who we should talk about in a moment, or Elizabeth Warren, a non-woman of color, they're open to that. But I do think that this moment does create some more tension here. Look, it's no secret. The reason why Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee is because of the African-American vote. And I do think he is probably going to feel some natural political pressure to make sure he's demonstrating to the African-American community that their vote matters to him in the form of a running mate that represents that community. I do think Biden can still win African-American voters without an African-American running mate. I just think it's a harder argument. And you have to ask yourself, if you're Joe Biden, do you want to spend the next 5 months getting African-American voters to get over that, as opposed to having somebody that they're going to be behind naturally? That is the core constituency in the Democratic coalition this time around.
All right, I'm afraid we are out of time, but we're going to continue this discussion at a later time. Joel Payne and Joseph Pinion, it is always good to see you. Take care. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
CBS News has learned that the FBI is looking for photos and videos from witnesses to Monday's interaction between Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. That's according to our Pat Milton. A law enforcement official told CBS News investigators are trying to get a 360-degree picture of Floyd's movements before, during, and after the incident. Major Garrett and Catherine Herridge join me now. Major is CBS News chief Washington correspondent, and Catherine is CBS News senior investigative correspondent. Welcome to both of you. Catherine, I'd like to start with you. What more can you tell